Unexpected Cargo, Chapter 4. Memories Continued. Ling and her husband, Isaac, adopted Jonathan as one of their own. They already had a daughter just a year younger named Aiko and a son just 2 years older named Noah. Ling had been a captured slave herself, originating in China. She had traveled far in her life, having been traded off or sold to different masters beginning at the young age of 10. Eventually, she found herself in the Middle East, where the Dragon Clan discovered and raided her band. They killed her master, who didn't treat her very well, so she did not regret his death. The clan confiscated the goods meant for the trade and welcomed the slaves as full citizens. In fact, many of the Dragon Clan's people were former slaves who had opted to remain with their adopted people. The very first thing they did to Jonathan was strip his clothes and burn them. Then they shaved him bald because he had lice and gave him a medicine to make sure that he didn't have any internal parasites. They gave him a physical exam using magic charms that were better than the technology anyone had available in their country. They bathed him, dressed him in the finest clothes, and fed him the best food and drink until he was stuffed to bursting. Through it all, Goldie stayed by his side, giving him moral support and helping him get his bearings. As time passed and Johnny healed, he grew to love his new life and family. Ling tried to help find his sister by magical and other means, but she was unable to locate her. Jonathan never gave up, even when everyone else did. He found Jasmine several years later. She had been sold to a brothel and died from one of the diseases that plague such disreputable establishments. He arrived in time to identify her body before they buried her. He bought her a white rosebud and placed it on her basket-woven coffin and said a prayer for her to the goddess to look after her in the spirit world. He had hoped for both her sake and his sister's that she would be alive and able to tell them where Mary had been taken. Years passed happily for the most part. Jonathan learned much about his new people, and a great deal of his time was spent in study of various subjects. When he turned 19, he developed a wanderlust fed by his well-rounded education about the world, and he wanted to see it for himself instead of just reading about it. So with his parents' blessing, he and Goldie set off for the coast and the boat docks near the Nazarene capital to find employment on the cargo boat. Having little money or no desire to join the Navy, a cargo boat was his best option. It turned out that getting a job on a cargo boat was easier said than done. Johnny went from ship to ship, speaking with more than a dozen captains over the next few days. They all recognized his potential as an excellent prospective crew member, but when they learned about his rat and he could not leave her behind, they all turned him down, saying they had enough trouble with the vermin without inviting another one to their ship. Feeling disheartened but determined to find employment on a ship, Johnny refused to give up until he had interviewed with all the available ship's captains or as limited as funds ran out. On the third day, a huge ship came into port, one that Johnny didn't see at first. His eyes kept sliding past it, with his brain not registering it was really there. After a few passes as he walked to the other ships in port, he got the nagging feeling he should really try to look at the hulking thing. The ship was the biggest he had seen by far, and it looked old, ugly, battered, and even rusted and through in some places. The faded words on the bow read, "The Lady," and his eyes and brain still didn't want to register that it was there, even though it undeniably was. Johnny grinned. It was a devious and simple spell he was quite familiar with, once he realized the oddity of seeing and not registering the ship. He thought he could bet his last gold piece that the lady was not nearly as derelict as she appeared to be. He introduced himself and Goldie as he carried her in his arms to the ship's crew who were unloading the cargo from the docks. He inquired as to where he could find the captain. They directed him to the very tavern where he had been staying for the past few days. He went in and found the man he sought sitting with another richly dressed man, 3 children, and a few personal guards that were heavily armed. Johnny was somewhat intimidated by the guards, but he screwed up his courage and went to introduce himself and Goldie to the captain. He soon learned that the captain's name was Raymond Blackbeard. That wasn't his real last name, but was the only one he would tell anyone. He did have a long and well-groomed black beard, along with the bright blue eyes and weathered features. He wore rough but clean clothes and sturdy boots. His rough appearance was greatly enhanced by the proximity of such richly dressed companions. King David, who was Raymond's principal employer, had come to visit and do business with his captain. The king had brought his 3 children, James at the oldest at 10, Richard at 8 years, and Elena also 8. The children sat quietly and observed everything that was going on between their father and the two men, especially the odd man with a plump golden cat-sized rat held affectionately in his arms. Jonathan noted that Richard, James, and David looked like they were cut from the same cloth. Same light brown skin, green eyes, and auburn hair, same stocky build and features that showed off their heavily mixed heritage of Anglo and Arabic descent. Elena, however, looked long and lanky, big-eyed with fine brows and heavy long lashes, full-lipped, dusky skin much the same shade as Johnny's own, and wavy black hair. He didn't know why, but he took an instant liking to the young princess, a sort of instinctive connection that he didn't make any sense to him at all. It took some time, but Raymond was eventually convinced to hire Johnny and his rat aboard his ship for a trial period. Both had to make themselves useful or they were both fired. He and Goldie agreed to his terms. It turned out the Lady was a beautiful ship once the captain hired them because the spell did not influence the crew. So it was during this time he got to know the king and his family when the ship visited their port. The king often invited his captain and his crew to the palace when Raymond planned to stay for a few days. Johnny learned a great deal about this cargo business, trade, machines, and how to maintain them. He learned new languages and visited many ports in many different countries. He even ventured inland a few times on his days off to see forests or green hills of grasslands. It was during this time he earned the nickname Desert Rat, which was both genial insult and a respectful title. Goldie had made herself useful by being a messenger and a vermin killer. Her intelligence and tough resourcefulness impressing the crew greatly. They saw the same qualities in Jonathan. He felt an honor to take this on his new nickname, for he believed it was no insult to be named after his beloved friend. The captain kept his family with him aboard the ship, and he had a daughter named Rebecca. Johnny and Rebecca fell madly in love during this first year out to sea. 2 years later, after they had married, Rebecca finally became pregnant, much to both of their delight. 6 months later, his beloved Rebecca went into premature labor, and both his wife and daughter were lost in spite of the medic's best efforts to save them both. After that, Johnny no longer desired a life out to sea. He couldn't stand the sight of large bodies of water without thinking of his wife and baby girl. So he took all of his savings he had hidden in his quarters and left the ship for the deep desert. The sight of the desolate landscape felt like a homecoming. The hot sun seemed to sear his soul and cauterize the gaping wound in his heart. It took a few months to pull himself together, and it was hard to go on living, but he managed. He eventually bought a large sand ship, which he christened the Dune Lady after the ship he worked on. It was old and in need of repair, but he got it running. It was better than original condition by the time he was through repairing it, thanks to his own mechanical skills and the help of Ling and Noah, who were powerful practitioners in the magical arts. The end result was a sturdy, state-of-the-art ship that looked like an ungainly derelict to all but himself and those he invited to see the real Dune Lady. The Dune Lady, without her illusions to help protect her from thieves, was sleek, aerodynamic, and gaily colored, with patterns that closely mimicked the ones used in the palace. It had 4 main segments that were held together by an accordion-like connections. The first section served as a combination cockpit and living space, and the other 3 were used for hauling people and cargo as needed. The living space was small and simple, yet tastefully decorated and comfortable. Most people didn't know that when the "Don't Register, I'm Here" spell failed to repel the would-be thieves or just curious people determined enough to really look at his vessel. They would only see a shabbily appointed space and a dirty kitchen infested with cockroaches. Another spell he had installed with Ling's and Noah's help made his ship blend in with the surrounding landscape. The Dune Lady could look like big rocks or a low pile of sand as desired. Bands of thieves were sometimes problematic, and it was a good policy to hide rather than fight them off. Not long after his ship was repaired, he began to establish himself as a reputable cargo runner and general laborer when things were slow. One day he had found himself delivering a large cargo of foodstuffs and other supplies to the gladiator stables in the city of Cleanwell. Cleanwell was a large trading hub full of many different peoples from all walks of life. Both the entertainment and trading business boomed here, and there was something for everyone if they knew where to look. Johnny didn't approve of blood sports or the practice of using slaves as well as freelance gladiators for entertainment. Some of them even featured animals in their bloody shows, and he despised those even more because he knew the animals were innocent. Johnny hunted on rare occasion when he needed to, but he never tortured an animal for sport. Mostly he stuck with a vegetarian diet. He didn't eat a lot of meat anyway. The head stable master took him into his office and behind the stables and started on the paperwork as Johnny's cargo was being unloaded by the dock workers. He trusted Goldie to keep watch on and tattle on them if they did anything they were not supposed to. He didn't like the stable master one bit, but this was business, not personal. The stable master was honest enough to pay him what he was owed. The fat man looked over the documents and signed where he needed to sign while he waited for the workers to confirm that everything he had ordered had been delivered. Once completed, he would make another order for the cargo delivery he would need next month. Bored, Johnny let his eyes wander to the wall of trophies the master had won. It was then Johnny heard something stir and scuffle forward out of a large box, bolted to the floor, its occupant shackled to it by the ankle by a manacle and chain. He blinked in surprise at the filthy and miserable-looking creature. The stable-master ignored her and continued to scowl and scratch at his signature here and there on Johnny's clipboard. At first he thought the creature was a very ugly human baby about a year old. She had a matted stripe of the palest gray hair down the middle of her head, an exaggerated cupid's bow of a mouth that looked grotesquely wide, a flat nose almost too large for her face, and Neanderthal-like brow ridges and stumpy wings that covered her in the same pale gray down as her head, tightly folded on her back. Her arms looked too long for her body and her legs too short, making it easier for her to walk on all fours. Johnny didn't know what to make of her until she sat down and stared at him balefully with yellow cat-like eyes. She bared her toothless gums, hissed, and threatened him with her teeny claws as she finally got a good look at him. "How'd you get hold of a dragon hatchling?" Johnny asked the stable-master as he continued to stare at the baby dragon. He knew that some dragons could shapeshift. It was not a common talent among them, but definitely not unheard of. Yet he had never heard of a dragon's power manifesting in a baby as young as this one. The poor girl couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. "Eh!" The stable-master grunted as he looked up from the papers. Then he noticed that what Johnny was staring at and snorted with disgust. "That waste of space and resources is the only offspring I can get my dragon to produce. You have no idea how hard it is to break in a dragon, train it to fight on command, fight well, then get it to breed so I can have a replacement when it's time to put it down when it can't fight anymore. Its stupid mother got herself killed in the ring before its egg hatched. I can't get the hatchling to do anything right. It doesn't follow orders unless I zap it with a goat prod and refuses to turn back into its true form. Hell, I'm not even sure it knows it's a dragon. If it wasn't so damned hard to catch and train another dragon, I would have drowned it and be done with it. Already it shows signs of being untamable. I've had a couple of dragons I caught that wouldn't be broken. No one could get near them without getting ripped apart, and when they seemed to begin to show signs of being broken in, they just lay there in the stall until they died. This one's young. I have some small hope it'll learn who her master is before it's old enough to think of suicide." Johnny's dislike of the man solidified into hatred. Some of his best friends were dragons, and the stable-master was being abusive to the innocent hatchling. He didn't let his emotions show. Instead, he smiled and decided to offer a bet. He did some quick and careful thinking on how he was going to get the bat dragon baby away from her cruel master, keep himself out of trouble, and remain in good standing with his employer. He got the idea how to accomplish his goal from a precognitive dream he had just 1 week before. At the time, he did not know why in the dream he had made the bet he was about to offer. Now he knew. "Tell you what," Johnny lied. "I'm seriously thinking about getting involved in the gladiator sporting events myself. How about I take that dragon off your hands?" The stable-master snorted at Johnny and then yelled at the baby dragon for peeing on his floor instead of the litter box he had provided for her. He scowled disgustedly at the mess as the ugly creature crawled back into her box. Then the stable-master turned back to Johnny and growled, "Didn't you hear me? Any captive dragon that hasn't a sliver of potential is too valuable just to give away." "How about I place a bet on one of your gladiators?" Johnny offered insistently. "Your dragon, if I win, 2 years free service with any cargo you want, no question asked if I lose." The stable-master mulled that over for what seemed like a long time. Johnny knew he'd like to use drugs to enhance the performance of his gladiators. The drugs were far from safe to use and illegal, and Johnny refused to smuggle the drugs he wanted. For the sake of good business, he didn't turn him in because he promised confidentiality to his clients as part of his service. 2 years free service with no questions asked meant that the stable-master would have a less difficulty of getting the drugs he desired and thus increase his potential profits. To him, this was less of a gamble than the risk he was taking with his dragon that would more than likely turn on him when she grew up. "Done!" the stable-master barked gleefully as he brought his hands together with a loud clap and rubbed them eagerly. "There's a show due this evening. You're best prepared to lose." Johnny just smiled and asked to go into the stables to pick out his gladiator to bet on, knowing he would recognize the one he needed to bet on from his dream. The stable-master agreed, and after he received the report from the dock worker that the full order had arrived. Then he signed the final signature. Then he handed the clipboard back to Johnny and led him into the stables. Johnny found the one he was looking for almost at once. He wasn't the biggest man he had ever seen, nor the most powerfully built, but appearances can be deceptive. The stable master eyed the gladiator with a practiced eye, much the same way one would praise a racehorse, laughed at Johnny, and said he was made a poor choice. Johnny just smiled and asked to speak with his champion in private for a few moments. The stable master nodded and left him alone with a man whose name was Steve, of all things. "Steve, I need you to do me a huge favor," Johnny said to him quietly so the other people in the stable wouldn't hear. "What?" Steve asked. He was leaning on the brick wall behind him with his arms folded, regarding Johnny with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "I need you to win a baby girl's freedom," Johnny told him urgently. "She's locked up in the stable master's office. He abuses her." "You mean the dragon hatchling?" Steve interrupted with distaste. "I saw her when I first came looking for employment. I don't like how he treats her either. You want me to free her?" "Yes," Johnny said with some relief. He was glad to see the real compassion in the gladiator's eyes. "I know a dragon named Bronwyn who can take care of her. I have placed a bet on you so I can take her away from here, if you win." Steve nodded seriously and said, "I can't promise you that I will win my fight, but I will promise to try my best for the sake of the baby." "That is all I can ask of you," Johnny said and extended his hand. Steve took it and shook it firmly and let go, sealing the deal. "Thanks. Goddess be with you and good luck." Steve smiled and went back to his warm-up exercises as Johnny turned to go back to the stable master's office. Johnny prayed to the goddess of all creation that she would see fit to have mercy on the little girl dragon and help his champion win. He knew that just because he saw Steve win in his dream didn't mean that the outcome would be guaranteed. The visions he saw were the most likely path the future would follow, and all it would take was one small thing to change the outcome. He hoped by giving his champion a righteous cause he would fight harder than he would have for his own selfish motives. Naturally, the stable master had the best seat in the whole arena. He and Johnny had no trouble watching the outcome of the match, with a hugely tall, muscular man as Steve, who was a head and shoulders shorter. He suspected the stable master had done this mismatch on purpose to ensure that he won his bet. It was one of the most awful spectacles he had ever seen, and he hated every moment of it. Nonetheless, he cheered Steve on, praying over and over in his mind that his champion would win. It soon became apparent what Steve lacked in brawn compared to his opponent. He had intelligence, speed, and wasn't afraid to fight dirty. The battle was long and heart-stopping. More than once, Steve looked as if he might lose, and Johnny prayed even harder. Somehow, Steve would recover and start to beat back his attack with sword and shield. As the fight continued, things kept getting bloodier and uglier. Both gladiators were tiring, and the crowd was going wild, yelling for the chosen champion to finish the other. Johnny was glad this wasn't to be a death match, just a clear knockout. The bigger man managed to knock Steve's sword out of his hand with his shield and simultaneously swung his hammer at him. Steve blocked the blow with his own shield and somehow managed to keep his feet, even pressed forward enough to unexpectedly knee the other man in the groin. Caught entirely by surprise, his opponent fell to his knees as Steve decked him one hard blow on the jaw before he could recover. His opponent fell over, out cold. The audience exploded and stood in the stands. Johnny sent up his heartfelt prayer of thanks to the goddess in his mind as he too stood up and cheered for Steve. The stable master didn't cheer. He looked a bit disgruntled at the loss of his bet, and then shrugged and gave Johnny a friendly slap on the back. He grumbled something about beginner's luck, and he returned to his office so Johnny could claim his prize. For the sake of appearances, so the stable master wouldn't suspect his real motives for wanting the dragon. He kept her chained to her crate once it was transferred into his living quarters on his ship. Moving was easy once the bolts were removed from the floor and held her crate in place. She didn't like being moved and hid inside, refusing to come out and screaming piercingly the whole time. Johnny stayed only long enough to thank Steve and use the healing charms Ling had made for him, and even tried to pay the man for his heroic efforts. "No thanks anyway," Steve said, refusing the money politely with a proud grin. "Just take care of that little girl for me. It was an honor to fight for her. I felt like the goddess was with me the whole time, giving me strength and helping me to win." Johnny left with a smile and a friendly slap on Steve's shoulder. They didn't know it then, but they were best friends after that. As soon as it was safe, Johnny unchained the dragon hatchling, who was still screeching loud enough to wake the dead. He had a hard time getting past her claws so he could undo the shackle. Then he had to lock her in the bathroom so he could clean her crate because he refused to leave it unless forced. He threw out her old blankets along with the shackle and chain, used the cleaning charm to cleanse and sanitize the crate, and replaced her bedding with an old but clean blanket. Then he turned his attention to the baby herself. Easier said than done, it turned out. He had put on leather gloves so he could gently pin her down long enough to use healing charms and cleaning charms on her. He would have preferred to just give her a bath, but no matter what he tried to calm her down, she just kept screaming and howling and kept fighting him. Johnny began to see why the stable master hated her so much. He was much stronger than a human baby, better coordinated too. Her claws were wicked sharp and grew longer the more upset she became. Johnny never lost his temper or his patience. He just tried to be quick as possible without hurting her. He put her back in her crate when he was done. Tired out, she stopped screeching and just made her little growling noises as she hid in her only safe place she knew. Johnny smiled at the now squeaky clean and well-groomed baby hiding in the shadows of the crate, yellow eyes glaring balefully at him. He left her in there to rest and calm down for a while as he continued his trade route. When he reached his next port of call in the teeny oasis town that was frequently used as rest stop for cargo runners, he parked and went back to his living area to see if he could find some food for his little girl as he was beginning to think of her. The little girl turned out had been stealthily busy while he was distracted. Finally discovering her freedom to move about, she had plucked up her courage to go exploring. She had used his bed to urinate and defecate on generously, more than once by the looks of it. She had found that his pillow was her favorite toy and ripped it to shreds with her claws, and so her cotton fluff was everywhere. She used the corner of one of the kitchen cabinets as a scratching post. Goldie would have alerted him to the mischief the hatchling was getting into if she wasn't currently missing in action, because she had volunteered to pass on a message to Bronwyn that hadn't returned yet. He knew that she was happy to go so she could escape the invasion and noise of their latest cargo. Johnny groaned and raked his fingers over his head, messing up his neatly pulled back hair and causing it to stand up a bit. He couldn't see where the baby had gone. She wasn't in her crate. He looked under his bed, in the bathroom shower, back in the kitchen, and checked the cabinets. He was about to head back into cargo areas when he heard a soft chuff over his head. There, in full true form, was his little girl hanging upside down by her sharp claws dug into the wood panels. She stared down at him, looking beautiful, cute, innocent, and smug all at once. Peep, peep, brrrr. The little girl deliberately burped up something from her crop, and he had only seconds' warning to try to jump out of the way before she splat the blob of vomit at him with impressive accuracy. The awful swine smelled worse than the mess she left on his bed, where it stuck to him on his chest. Johnny growled at her in his best imitation of a mother dragon reprimanding her errant child. "Cheer up?" the little girl inquired sweetly as she bobbed her head and thought of hawking up another gob. Johnny glared at her, then went to open the windows to air out the place. Fetched both his cleansing charm and his regeneration charm from the junk drawer in the kitchen. Soon he had his living quarters and himself back into order, except for the part of the ceiling where that little girl was hanging from. The little girl hung there for longer than he expected she would. She watched him from a vantage point as he began to cook for himself, Goldie, and just in case she returned that evening, and for the dragon. He made a sandwich for himself and put that away for later. Goldie and the baby had to come first. He'd made a small stuffed salad with no dressing for Goldie and with a side of sliced pear and placed that back in the fridge. He made making dinner for himself and Goldie only took about 20 minutes. Next he pulled out his mortar and pestle and his cook pot. He dug out some cube steak he had been saving from the freezer, plus some mixed frozen vegetables, then boiled them all in the pot until they were quite soft. As the food was cooking, the little girl continued to hang there, sniffing interestedly. Goldie appeared on Johnny's bed just as he was scooping out the cup of beef and vegetables into a mortar with a slotted spoon, making sure that at least some of the liquid got into the mixture as he scooped it out. "Bronwyn says she's willing to adopt the brat," Goldie reported irritably as she stared at the hanging baby dragon. Then she asked curiously, "How long has she been like that?" "I don't know exactly," Johnny sighed and began to smash the softened meat and vegetables into a thick paste. He remembered that mother dragons chewed up their baby's food and then spat it out for them. He was trying to mimic that behavior, minus the chewing and spitting. "But she seems happy up there, and it's better than what she had been doing earlier." "Really?" Goldie asked. He relayed what happened as he finished making the paste and scooped it out into an old tin bowl and placed it on the floor next to little girl's crate. Then he fetched another bowl and filled it with water, then placed it next to her food dish. Little girl kept stretching her neck out and sniffing the air, but showed no sign of wanting to come down just yet. Knowing her food was still hot for her, Johnny cleaned up and placed the remaining paste in a container for later, and placed it in the little fridge. He deliberately made extra so he wouldn't have to cook again for a little while. He picked up Goldie and placed her on the counter before serving her dinner. As Goldie nibbled on a slice of pear, Johnny tested to see if the paste was still too hot. It had cooled nicely, and he licked it off with his finger slowly while making sure the dragon saw what he was doing. He hummed with more delight at the taste than he felt. The paste was a bit bland for his liking, but it wasn't too bad. Peep! Little girl said as she bobbed her head, licked her chops with her pointy pink tongue, and swallowed hard. Johnny smiled. Good, you're hungry. How about coming down? Cheer up! Little girl answered back, but stubbornly stayed put. Johnny thought about it, then decided to get a collapsible footstool from under his bed. The ceiling was just low enough that Johnny could touch it with his fingertips if he stood up on his toes a bit, but prying off the little dragon would take a few more inches. Little girl snarled at him with her toothless gums, but since all her feet were occupied, she couldn't use her claws to hurt him. She smiled at him and did the last thing she expected. He scratched her eye ridge. She jumped in surprise, not sure what to make of Johnny's touch. He knew from long experience all the sweet spots on a dragon and used it to his full advantage. He moved to the back of her neck just below her down feather mane and firmly but gently began to rub her there with fingers and thumb. Little girl froze, uncertain and tense, waiting for something bad to happen. Johnny began to sing quietly in a pleasant baritone, an old lullaby he heard a dragon mother sing to their offspring. He wasn't completely fluent in dragon language, but he understood most of what he was singing. The little girl slowly relaxed and shuddered under his ministrations. Half closing her eyes and arching into his hand, she moaned longingly as he worked his way down her neck and withers. He took a moment to examine her more closely, disguising his gentle prodding with petting strokes, and briefly furrowed his brow in disapproval at her physical state. She was just a bit too thin. He could feel individual bones when he shouldn't have been able to do that. Her scales were dull when they should have been shiny. Apparently, not only did the stable master show her no affection as well as abuse her, he had not fed her well either. Eventually, he was able to relax the little girl enough to convince her to let go of the ceiling. He caught her, flipped her upright, and placed her on the front of her food dish. The little girl didn't so much as eat her food as inhale it. Then she took a big sloppy drink of water afterward and let out a huge belch. That first night was the worst, but it got better after that. After he had let her do her business outside, she insisted on sleeping in his bed. Johnny accepted this with a shrug and left to go shopping, leaving Goldie to keep an eye on her. He bought a sling to as a makeshift pouch, remembering dragon mothers took their babies everywhere, never leaving them alone for the first 3 years of their offspring's life. Johnny thought not only would the little girl find the sling comforting, it would be a nice way to keep her out of trouble. He bought extra foodstuffs that he knew dragons liked to eat. They were omnivorous, which was just as well, as big as little girl species could get. He had his extra purchases taken to the very back area of his ship in the cold storage unit usually reserved for perishable cargo. He planned to head out for the Temple Rocks where Goldie said Bronwyn would be waiting for them. She could have just flown to them and met them where the Dune Lady was at the time, but she preferred to avoid most human settlements. The next morning, after a much interrupted night because little girl kept waking up to eat and go to the bathroom outside, Johnny set out for home. The trip took a day and a half longer than expected because of the frequent stops Johnny had to make to let little girl out or suffer the consequences. The Dune Lady did have an autopilot, so when Johnny needed to rest, bathroom break, or cook meals, or even take a nap, all he had to do was make sure he had correctly plotted his course and check the opinion periodically to make sure everything was in working order. Thanks to Ling's magic augmenting the Dune Lady's technology, he never needed to stop for fuel. He had solar panels bolted to the roof, providing electricity for lights, air conditioning, and other things for himself and his companion's creature comforts. He did need to occasionally refill his water tanks, but not as often as other cargo ships. He had fitted the Dune Lady with a water recycler so he would have drinking water and things like showers every night. Johnny had no room for a washer and dryer, so he stuck with his magic charms to keep his clothes clean. During those days of travel, Johnny forgot to be sad. He was too busy looking after his charge to remember his wife and daughter. He'd gotten his life back together, and it helped to keep busy. But at night, when he was alone except for Goldie curled up next to him in his bed, he remembered and missed his Rebecca and his baby girl. In the daytime, he smiled and acted normal, but people who knew him sensed the underlying omnipresent grief. His genuine smiles were less frequent and he seldom laughed as he used to. He was healing, there was no doubt about that, but the process was slow and often difficult. Little girl got him to laugh just by being herself. She was a funny little baby. He was growing attached to her in spite of his determination to do the right thing. And she was a dragon, and she had to learn to be one. Unknown to him at the time, the little girl had other ideas. There was a place of huge stones pitted full of holes, passageways, and buildings carved right into the more solid parts. Bronwyn waited for them at the steps of a main temple which was the biggest and grandest of the carved-out buildings. Johnny carrying little girl in a sling and Goldie following at his heels, he approached the mature female as she lowered her head to get a better look at her new daughter. Johnny caught little girl looking at herself in the bathroom mirror on the way there, shifting back and forth between baby form and her true form, getting better at it by the day. See, Sensei's practice sessions were more about trying to understand what she was than learning how to turn into a better human baby. He worried it might be a sign that she would not want to go with Bronwyn, but he had to try for her sake, even if he felt his heart break a little. Johnny kissed her on the head and put her down in front on the ground. Little girl made a protesting squeak and hid behind his legs. She peeked out from behind him, looking up at Bronwyn. Bronwyn stretched out her neck towards little girl, snorted, and then made a low purring rumble. Little girl sniffed and took an experimental swipe at Bronwyn's scaly nose. It took a little while, but eventually little girl was coaxed into Bronwyn's pouch, and she flew away into her cave. Since his clan was in the area, Johnny took time to visit for a couple of days. On the second evening, Bronwyn found him talking to his sister outside her tent. She promptly scooped little girl out from her pouch with one forefoot and handed her over to Johnny. He almost didn't recognize her. She was in her full human form, only this, she was perfect and beautiful. One look at Johnny and she cried out and clung to his neck, refusing to let go. She wept great big tears of relief and nuzzled his shoulder. "I can't raise her," Bronwyn said regretfully. "She fell into deep depression not long after I left with her. She did nothing but cry, she wouldn't eat, and she refused to remain in her true form. She loves you, Johnny. To her, you were her mother." "I can't," he protested as he stroked and rocked the little girl to comfort her. "If you don't take her, she will lose her will to live," Bronwyn insisted. "She'll die without you." "I'm not a dragon. I can't teach her what she needs to know." "I'll help you teach her," Bronwyn replied gently. It took an hour or so to figure out how they were going to raise little girl together. Johnny would just have to visit Bronwyn more often so his new daughter would hopefully learn how to be a proper dragon.